Everybody, welcome to the East Hampton Library and Electric Vehicles 101. Everybody is muted at this time, but if you have any questions, feel free to type it into the chat box or hold on to your questions for the end of the presentation, where our presenters will be answering any and all questions. And with that, I am going to turn it over to our presenters from Drive Electric and let them take it.
Hi, my name is Rosemary Miscali. I chair the Education and Outreach Committee for the Drive Electric Long Island. And with me today is our presenter, Kaylee Verrill, and our outreach coordinator, Beth Fattini. Next chart, please. So Drive Electric Long Island is a coalition of EV stakeholders. It's led by the U.S. Green Building Council on Long Island, and it's dedicated to encouraging the adoption of electric vehicles and charging infrastructure on Long Island. And if you want to learn more about electric vehicles after this event, you can visit our website at driveelectriclongisland.org. I'll tell you a little bit about some of our partners. Next chart, please. We have a range of partners from environmental company organizations, transportation companies themselves, utility companies. So with the coalition, we're working together, and rather than kind of doing our own thing apart, we coordinate our efforts to try to get a better result. So now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Kaylee Verrill. Kaylee, just 1 second.
And I can always introduce myself to Rosemary.
Okay, no, I got it. Katie is a sustainable mobility specialist at ICF, working primarily on the 501 New York Rideshare program, and is a member of the Drive Electric Long Island EV Coalition. Before joining ICF, Kaylee served as the Clean Cities Coordinator for the state of Maine and led several alternative fuel vehicle initiatives, including the designation of an EV corridor across the state of Maine. Kaylee holds a bachelor's degree in environmental science from the University of Southern Maine and has a background in sustainability and clean transportation. She's an avid outdoors person with a passion for hiking, biking, and road trips. In her former Hyundai Ioniq electric vehicle, but she'll tell you more about that in a minute. Kaylee?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rosemary. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. This is a really exciting topic that we get to share with you tonight. We're excited to go into the details of electric vehicles and charging, and we're excited to hear your questions. As it was mentioned at the beginning, if you could please hold your questions until the end, that would be greatly appreciated. But I always encourage folks to keep a notepad nearby and jot down questions as we start going through information, just in case they come up. We don't want to forget them. So have your pencil ready, have your notepad ready, and we'll go ahead and get started. So we have a few different topics that we're going to run through this evening. We're going to start off with the history of electric vehicles, just to give you a flavor for the very early stages of electric vehicles. Then we'll talk about electric vehicle market trends and forecasts, so you can have an idea as to where electric vehicles are projected to go. We're going to dive into some EV basics, followed by learning about some environmental considerations associated with owning electric vehicles and charging. We'll then talk about charger trends and forecasts, so you can see the public charging stations that are expected to be installed on Long Island in the near future. We'll talk about EV charging basics, followed by EV charger and electric vehicle incentives to help bring down the cost of equipment and vehicles. And then finally, we'll talk about some common misconceptions to really solidify the learning. After that, we're going to share with you some resources that you can use to continue the learning tonight. And then we'll do a Q&A session with myself, of course, and some of our EV drivers that we have with us here tonight. So we'll dive right into it. We'll start off with a brief history of electric vehicles. And I always like to note, for those that are not history buffs like myself, we will keep this very brief for you. So a very interesting factoid, the first successful electric vehicle actually debuted in the US around 1890. So they've been around for a really long time. It was created by a chemist in Iowa by the name of William Morrison, and it was a 6-passenger vehicle with a top speed of 14 miles per hour, which at the time was pretty good. Now, by about 1900 or so, electric vehicles made up about a third of the vehicles on the roadway. So they were pretty prevalent. Now, as time went on and advanced, passenger vehicles in the early 1900s were available in 3 different fuel types. That's gasoline, steam, and of course, electric. Now, electric vehicles were pretty popular at the time. This was because they were really quiet, they had really limited emissions and fumes, and they were relatively easy to operate as compared to some of those gasoline vehicles. Now, jumping ahead a little bit to about 1908, we started to see the decline of electric vehicles, and that was because Ford released their Model T. Now, their Model T was a pretty comparable size vehicle to the electric vehicle, but it was significantly cheaper. So to give you some perspective, at the time, a brand new electric vehicle cost about $1,700 brand new. Wouldn't that be nice today? Whereas that Model T cost about $650 brand new. So you can see why people were considering the switch to gasoline over electric. Now, jumping ahead to about the 1920s, gas became pretty cheap as it was very abundant. The roadways expanded and became easier for travel, and electric vehicles unfortunately became the less favorable option to gasoline vehicles. Now, after the launch of the Model T, electric vehicles really went into the dark ages until about the 1960s. Now, in the 1960s and the 1970s, the US actually faced soaring oil prices, and this was due to oil shortages, which in turn caused gasoline shortages, which really sparked a newfound interest in electric vehicles. Now, in 1976, Congress passed the Electric and Hybrid Vehicle Research, Development, and Demonstration Act, which authorized the US Energy Department to start supporting electric and hybrid vehicles and start doing some research on them. But unfortunately, even after that research was conducted, EVs really still couldn't compete with the gasoline vehicles on the roadway. And then shortly thereafter, in the late 70s, gasoline prices dropped, gasoline again became more abundant, and the electric vehicles sort of fell to the wayside. Now, if we fast forward to about the 1990s, there were new federal emissions regulations, which sparked yet another new interest in the electric vehicle. Now, at this point, EVs really had improved performance as compared to their 1970s elders. And they had an improved range, which at the time in the 90s was about 60 miles on a full charge. Now, during the 90s, GM produced their EV1, which, although it had a pretty high following, it was never really mass produced because of the high production costs. And again, EVs sort of fell to the wayside due to lack of public interest. But even with that lack of public interest, the US Energy Department was still working in the background to improve that EV technology and increase the battery performance. Now, in the late 1990s, EVs began to see a new beginning. The Toyota Prius, which is pictured, was mass-produced in Japan in about 1997 and really gained significant popularity among celebrities here in the US. And then shortly thereafter that, Tesla Motors announced their startup in 2006. And as we all know, they became a pretty successful company. And that spurred many other big automakers to accelerate their work on their own electric vehicles. Now, in 2010, Chevy released their Volt with a V. That was a hybrid electric vehicle, and Nissan released their Leaf, which was a fully electric vehicle, or a BEV, battery electric vehicle, as they're sometimes referred to. Now, with the public interest in EVs really starting to grow again, the US Energy Department initiated what was called the Recovery Act, which led to the installation of over 18,000 residential and public EV chargers all across the country. Alrighty, so now that we've learned a little bit of the basics of EVs and charging and a little bit about the history, I'd love to show you this video here. It's pretty interesting. I hope you like it.
What if everything ran on gas? Then again, what if everything didn't? The 100% electric, zero gas Nissan Leaf. Innovation for the planet, innovation for all.
I really like this video. I think it's kind of comical, but at the same time, it shows us that we already power so many things with electricity. So why not our vehicles? It just seems to make sense. Now let's jump right ahead to our next section here. Part 2, we're going to look at EV market trends and forecasts. So as you can see from this graph here, the number of new or original electric vehicles in New York has really grown dramatically since 2011. Now, it's important to note that these figures here represent new electric vehicle registrations and not the registrations of pre-owned EVs. Now, as you can see, in 2011, there were less than 1,000 new EV registrations. And in 2021, there were nearly 40,000 new EV registrations, most of which were fully electric vehicles, meaning not hybrid or plug-in hybrid. And as actually you can see here, we have the figures for 2022 as well. The reason why this is a smaller figure right now is because it only goes through July of this year. So we still have a lot of time to actually compete with our 2021 numbers and see how many EV registrations we can get. We've also noticed this year that there's been some issues with supply, which has somewhat hampered people's ability to be able to acquire new electric vehicles. But despite that, the supply issue, it seems like electric vehicle sales are still increasing, which is great. Now, in the last slide, we saw the number of new EVs registered in the state of New York. And here we're looking at the total number of EVs registered on the road in New York as of August 1st of this year, which I'm very excited to say is well over 100,000 at this point. I know we were really excited to break that number. Now, of that 100,000, 48,000 of which are plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, where 64,000 are battery electric vehicles. And we'll get into the difference between those two in a couple slides. Now, as you can see from this map here, EV adoption is pretty widespread all throughout the state of New York, with heavier concentrations in these areas that are darker green. We're very excited to see that New York City and Long Island, of course, are a darker shade of green, meaning that we have pretty heavy EV adoption as compared to the rest of the state. Now, with that, let's talk a little bit about EV basics. So there are 3 different types of electric vehicles to be aware of, and we've talked a little bit about 2 of them, but let's take a deep dive. The first one that I want to talk about is the battery electric vehicle, or the BEV, as it's sometimes referred to. Now, the battery electric vehicle is powered solely by an electric battery, and it has no gas engine components. Now, most of these battery electric vehicles are capable of fast and level 2 charging, and they have 0 tailpipe emissions. Now, I just mentioned fast and level 2 charging. We're going to talk about that as well in the next couple of slides. Now, the next type of EV I want to talk about is a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, or a PHEV. Now, these are comprised of a battery-powered engine, which does need to be plugged in, as well as a gasoline-powered engine. Now, these can only charge on level 2 chargers, not the fast chargers like the BEVs can use. Now, the last type of electric vehicle is the hybrid electric vehicle, or the HEV. Now, these are low-emission vehicles that use an electric motor to assist gas-powered engines. Now, these vehicles do not require any sort of charge and are just fueled by gasoline. Now, here are examples of a few 2022 battery electric vehicles that are currently available on the market or will be available on the market later this year. Now, this is just a snapshot of a few of them, so you can see the different models that they can come in, from trucks to sedans, SUVs, compact cars. This cool looking Volkswagen van is pretty interesting. But all of these vehicles vary in several different ways. The first way they vary is in cost, of course. Just for an example here on this slide, the Tesla Model S, that's this red one right here, that's more on the higher end of cost. It costs about $82,000 brand new, but it ranges. So the Nissan Leaf, on the other hand, which is this one right here, is about $27,000 brand new. Now the range, the distance that these vehicles can travel on a full charge, also varies. That Tesla Model S that we were just talking about here, that's on the higher end of the cost spectrum, has a pretty significant range of 370 miles on a full charge. The Nissan Leaf, on the other hand, has 150-mile range on a full charge. Now, most of these new electric vehicles, like the Volkswagen ID4 or the Hyundai Ioniq 5, they tend to fall in that mid $30,000 to $40,000 price range and have about a 250-mile range on the vehicle with one full charge. So overall, in terms of cost and range, they're pretty comparable to similar gasoline vehicles. Now, here are a few examples of the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. So the ones that have the plug-in component, the electric component, and the gasoline component. Now, again, these are ones that are either currently available on the market or will be later this year. And similar to those battery electric vehicles, these vehicles range in cost and the distance that they can travel on a full charge as well. So just to give you some examples here, the Audi A7 cost about $69,000 brand new. And the Mitsubishi Outlander, for example, cost about $37,000 brand new. Now, the range, of course, varies a bit. The Ford Escape has an EV range, so just electric range, of 37 miles, with an overall range that includes gasoline of 520 miles. The Mitsubishi Outlander has an electric range of 24 miles, with an overall range, gas included, of 320 miles. Now, very similar to those battery electric vehicles, these plug-in hybrid electric vehicles tend to fall in about the mid $30,000 to $40,000 price range. And they can travel about 400 miles on one full charge and one tank of gas, which is pretty impressive. Now, I always like to make folks aware of a few considerations when owning and operating an electric vehicle. The first one that I want to mention is that electric vehicles are incredibly quiet. People are actually often shocked by how little noise the vehicles actually produce. Typically, you'll hear just a very light hum from the vehicle and the sound of the tires on the roadway. My husband and I used to live in an apartment complex closer to the city. And when I would drive past him in my electric vehicle, my little Hyundai Ioniq, sometimes I'd pull up next to him and, wave, say hello. And 9 times out of 10, I would scare the daylights out of him because he just couldn't hear me coming. The next one I want to note is that electric vehicles accelerate very quickly. Typically, as soon as you press that pedal down, it's going to accelerate. There's no lag or wait time like there is with a gasoline or diesel powered vehicle. The next consideration is that electric vehicle batteries are actually comprised of many small individual batteries that can be replaced as needed. Now, on a similar note, talking about batteries, EV batteries have an estimated lifespan of about 10 years. Now, with that being said, those individual pieces, if they happen to fail, can be replaced as needed, so you don't have to replace the entire unit. But many manufacturers also have significant warranties that cover battery replacements up to a certain mileage. Now, just to make you aware, a battery replacement for the entire unit can cost $10,000 or less. But again, more often than not, if you ever needed a replacement of some sort, it would have to be for just those small cells, battery cells, not the entire unit as a whole. Now, the next one I wanted to mention is that EVs have very low operating costs. This is because they have no oil, they have fewer moving parts, and a lot of times they can receive over-the-air software updates. So there's less need for those costly trips to the manufacturer. The next one that I want to talk about is regenerative braking. And I want to apologize to folks. My cat is beating down the door behind me, very needy, so apologize if you hear that. But regenerative braking it's a really interesting form of technology. Now, what it is it draws energy from that vehicle's momentum, which is sent back to the battery, adding more range to the vehicle and reducing the wear on the brake pads. So you actually have to replace the brake pads less often on an electric vehicle than you would a comparable gasoline vehicle traveling on the same roads and same distances. Now, the final EV consideration that I want to mention is range impacts. So there are certain things that can drive down the range of your vehicle. So that's the mileage that it can travel on one full charge. And those are things like added weight to the vehicle, like snow and ice, for example, or maybe if you're towing a trailer or you have a rack on the top that's loaded with equipment or, things of that nature, those can impact range, but so can vehicle accessories. And by accessories, I mean things like heating or cooling. So let's say it's the middle of winter and I've got to commute to work. Maybe it snowed the night before and I keep my vehicle outside. If I have my heated steering wheel going, I have the heated seats going, I have the heat blasting, and maybe I didn't fully clear off all the snow, there's a little extra weight, I will see a decrease in the overall range of the vehicle. Now, at most, your range is going to decline 30%. It will never decline any more than that. That's the most I've ever seen in reports. Published by NYSERDA or other government entities, but I do like to make folks aware of that. And the reason why that is because the vehicle is working a little bit harder to power those different accessories and move that additional weight, which draws additional energy from that battery. Now, this is one of my favorite charts to show. This is electricity costs versus gasoline costs. And what it does is it compares gallon of gasoline equivalent. That's how we compare electricity to gasoline. And it shows fuel costs from April of 2000 to April of 2022 of this year, all across the US. Now, as you can see, the cost of electricity per gallon of gasoline equivalent stays relatively stable around $1.40, $1.41. Now, gasoline, on the other hand, and as we've experienced throughout this year, it's quite variable, with the average cost being around $3 per gallon. But in April of this year, of course, we were seeing a lot higher prices. It was around $4.13 across the nation. Now, as you can see, gasoline prices are a lot higher than electricity prices. So fueling an electric vehicle, on average, is far less than fueling a gasoline or diesel vehicle. Now, after learning a little bit about the dynamic gasoline prices, my question to you is, which curve would you rather be on? The one relating to renewable energy prices that steadily goes down, very predictable, or the one with gasoline prices that's very jagged, scary looking, unpredictable, somewhat rhetorical. So here I want to talk about a couple different incentives. There are a few available that I like to make folks aware of. The first ones here that I want to discuss are those available in New York State. The first one, of course, is the New York Drive Clean rebate. Now, this is a tiered rebate. So folks can get up to $2,000 for electric vehicles with a range greater than 200 miles, which most do. $1,000 for EVs with a range between 40 and 199 miles, up to $500 for EVs with a range less than 40 miles, and up to $500 for EVs with an MSRP value greater than $42,000. Now, some additional incentives I like to discuss are exemption from the annual emission inspection. That's because electric vehicles don't have any tailpipe emissions. And of course, HOV lane access for battery electric vehicles and those plug-in hybrids through the Clean Pass program. Now, this slide we're still working on filling out a little bit. There was some recent legislation in regard to the federal electric vehicle incentive. Now, on August 16th, the US government passed the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, among several other things, it made changes to what is now the Clean Vehicle Credit. This credit provides up to $7,500 for qualified electric vehicles. Battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles purchased on or after December 31st of 2009. This is, well, tough to say. I apologize. This is a newer one that's a little bit difficult to navigate. But this applies to EVs that were purchased on or after December 31st of 2009. So the credit is equal to $25 plus $100 for vehicles that draw propulsion energy from a battery with at least 5 kilowatt hours of capacity. Now, I know that sounds like gibberish, but we are definitely working on navigating this new legislation that has a lot of moving parts to make it easier for people to interpret. Now, this credit is up to $7,500 in total. Yes.
Kaylee, later with the Q&A, if people are interested in that, I can, I was on a webinar today with Plug in America, so I've got some charts. So if people are interested in that, we can discuss that more later.
Oh, that's perfect. Thanks, Rosemary. This has been one that I've been grappling with for the past couple of days. But I did do a little bit of research and I found that there are quite a few vehicles that are eligible. And here on this slide, I have just a snapshot of a few of those eligible vehicles. This is not all of them, just a snapshot.
The Hyundai is not.
Oh, the Hyundai Ioniq
not
is
assembled
not?
in North America. I've got a couple of charts that they used today that help to explain
perfect.
it, so I can show it later.
Awesome. I'll skip through this part then. All righty. So we'll talk about some environmental considerations associated with owning an electric vehicle. Now, electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles that are running only on electricity have zero tailpipe emissions. But with that being said, emissions may be produced by the source of electrical power, such as a power plant. Now, in areas that use relatively low polluting energy sources for electricity generation, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles and battery electric vehicles typically have lower emissions well to wheel than similar conventional vehicles running on gasoline or diesel. Now, in regions that depend heavily on coal or other fossil fuels for electricity generation, electric vehicles really will not show very strong well-to-wheel emissions benefits. Now, with that being said, in New York, most electricity is generated from natural gas, nuclear, and hydro sources, meaning that EVs have a much lower carbon footprint than their internal combustion engine counterparts. Now, another neat thing to note is that in 2019, New York set a goal of generating 100% of its electricity using renewable energy sources like wind, solar, hydro by 2040. So this means that the electricity grid is only going to get cleaner over time, and so will your electric vehicle. Now, another common question that we get relating to the environmental impacts of electric vehicles is what happens to that battery or those individual cells at the end of their useful lifespan. And we're very pleased to tell you that over 95% are recycled or repurposed. Now, they're recycled or repurposed in a number of different ways, but one of the most common is actually repurposing, where those batteries are given a whole new life in another battery-powered object. Actually, the US government, the Department of Energy, was looking into streetlights and using them for streetlights, which was a pretty interesting topic as well. So very good to note that majority are recycled. Now let's get into EV charging basics. Now, just like how you may charge your phone overnight or maybe on your desk while you're working, electric vehicle charging works just the same. Most people charge their electric vehicle on a personal level 2 charging station overnight at their home while they sleep, or at their workplace if their workplace allows charging and has charging on site. That way, whenever you're ready to take off, your vehicle has a full charge. Now, publicly available level 2 and DC fast chargers are really great for people that are traveling long distances, maybe going on road trips. But for most EV drivers, you'll find that they do a majority of their charging right at home using a personal level 2 charging station or that basic level 1 charger that comes with the vehicle. Now let's talk about the 3 different types of charging. The first one that I actually just mentioned is level 1 charging. Now, when a driver plugs their car into a standard wall outlet, like the ones that you have all over your home, that's called level 1 charging, and it's the most basic form of charging that there is, but it's also the slowest. But for people who don't drive a lot each day and are able to charge right at home, level 1 charging is actually a very convenient way to charge because it doesn't require installing a level 2 charging station. And as I mentioned, these level 1 charging stations actually come right with the vehicle. The next type of charger is a level 2 charger. This utilizes a 240 volt circuit like the kind used for electric dryers, for example. Now they do charge quite a bit faster than level 1 chargers. On average, in an average electric vehicle, it takes about 5 to 6 hours to fully charge the vehicle instead of 20 plus. Like the hours you would see for level 1 charging. And level 2 chargers are found most often where vehicles are parked for a pretty significant amount of time, where charging speed doesn't necessarily matter. Examples could be at your home or maybe at your workplace. Although you will see some level 2 charging stations in public places as well. Sometimes you may see them at shopping centers or maybe at local municipalities. Now, the last type of EV charging is called DC fast charging or direct current fast charging. Now, if level 1 and level 2 charging is kind of like dial-up internet, then DC fast charging is like that fiber internet. Now, when charging on a level 1 or level 2 charger, electric vehicles convert AC power from the grid to DC power to recharge that battery, which is why it takes a little bit longer. DC fast chargers, on the other hand, do this conversion internally using a much larger grid connection, and they deliver that DC power directly to the vehicle, which results in a much faster and more powerful charge to the vehicle. Now, as the industry has evolved, so have electric vehicle battery sizes, and they've really increased over the years. And as you may have seen from our history of electric vehicles, the range has increased dramatically. And so has the power of these chargers to keep up with those vehicles as well and get people the fastest charge that they can to fully charge their vehicle battery. And we only expect that chargers will advance even more over the next few years. Now, it's very important to note that charging time is dependent on the size of the battery and the charging capacity of the vehicle and the charger. Now, the number that you see here on the slides for charging times, those are all averages. Charging times can also vary based on how much you drive your electric vehicle and how much you charge it. So just like a cell phone battery, the battery capacity of the electric vehicle can slightly decrease over time and can take a little bit longer to charge to that maximum capacity with more usage. Now, it's also very important to note that the average commuter drives about 40 miles a day. Now, knowing this, one could plug in their electric vehicle overnight at their personal level 2 charging station and have a full charge in about 1 hour on an average electric vehicle. So now that we know a little bit about the different types of chargers, let's talk about the different connector types on those chargers. Now, the most important one, and the one that you'll probably see the most often, is the CCS. That's the one almost right here in the middle. This is the industry standard. And in North America, all newly manufactured passenger EVs, with the exception of Tesla, will use this CCS connector. Now, Tesla connectors, the one that you see here, I always like to tell people, it looks kind of like a frog to me. Those are found exclusively in Tesla vehicles. And this is because Tesla was one of the first to market with EV fast charging. And so they designed their own connector type. Now, Tesla does sell adapters for their electric vehicles that allow Tesla drivers to charge at non-Tesla stations, but it's not always recommended. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But it is important to note, so Tesla vehicles can charge at Tesla and non-Tesla charging stations. Non-Tesla vehicles, like the Chevy Bolt, for example, can only charge at non-Tesla stations. So with my Hyundai Ioniq, I couldn't go charge it at a Tesla station, only at non-Tesla stations, which, believe me, there are a lot out there. I feel like we typically only see Tesla stations, the supercharger stations, when we're driving around. But in a couple of slides, I'll show you a really great map that shows all of the different public stations available that are Tesla and non-Tesla. Now, the next type of connector that I wanted to note is the Type 1 J1772, kind of a mouthful. We call it the J plug for short. This is used for level 1 and for level 2 charging. Now, as you know, level 1 and level 2 are considerably slower than fast charging. But this charger here, of course, is the one that you're going to use for that level 2 charging that you'd have on a charger at your home or maybe one at your workplace. Now, a note on adapters. So we did mention that Tesla does sell adapters for their vehicles to be charged on non-Tesla stations. Now, there are actually few adapter types out there, but they are available and they help to connect one industry standard to another. Now, even though they're available, it's really not recommended that they're used. It's more recommended that you select the charger type that's compatible with your vehicle. And a lot of times when you approach public charging stations, there will be multiple connector types on that charger for different types of vehicles. So you can pick the one that matches your vehicle. Now, the reason why we don't recommend adapters is because it adds an additional component between the electrical connection between the EV and the charger itself, which can increase the probability of faults and affect the functional safety. And as I mentioned, it's highly recommended that you select the connector that is compatible with your electric vehicle, like the CCS or the J plug, for example. Now, I wanted to mention as well, there is an EV charger incentive available. I do have to update this slide. It's no longer $500, it's $400, but still very significant for a level 2 smart charger. This is available through PSEG Long Island, and it actually really takes a significant amount off the total cost of the charger. So that's a really great one to look into.
It just became 400 on August 1st.
Yes, it was pretty recent, unfortunately, but that's okay. Still an incentive. So this is a really great snapshot here for a couple of reasons. So here we're looking at the Alternative Fuels Data Center Station Locator. It's a really great tool that you can use. It's completely free. They have a mobile application as well. And you can go on there to see all different public charging stations in your area. Now you can see all the different information about the charger, like the location, the charger type, so whether that's level 1, level 2, DC fast, the connector type, so whether it's Tesla, CCS, that J plug. You can also see if there's different payment types or if there's payment options available, and all the information that you would need to be able to use the charger. But I also really like this image because you can see all of the different public charging stations all across Long Island. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times when you're driving, you'll typically see those Tesla supercharger stations because they're large, they have lots of branding, but there are so many other stations out there that non-Tesla users can also utilize. And this is just a snapshot, and you may not always see them. A lot of times they're smaller, or maybe they're not in the most obvious locations, like at the corner of a couple of roads at an intersection, like a gas station would be. They're more often found at places like municipalities, colleges and universities, major shopping centers, areas like that. So you might not always see them, but it's important to note that they're there. And there's many different station locators out there, aside from this one published by the Alternative Fuels Data Center, that can help you find them. Now, with that, let's dive into our next topic. We're going to look at EV charger trends and forecasts. So as you can see from the graph here, the number of publicly available EV charging stations has really increased dramatically since 2010. In 2010, there were 47 public EV charging ports all across the state. At the end of 2021, there were over 7,000 public level 2 charging ports available and nearly 1,000 DC fast. Now, this is all across the state, not just on Long Island, but this is still very impressive. And these numbers are expected to continue rising to keep up with the demand for electric vehicles. Now, just like the number of new EVs, as we saw, the number of charging stations is expected to continue growing. And this growth is really essential because some people have what's called range anxiety. You know, they don't always see the chargers, they don't always know where they can charge. And people really like to know, you know, they can get to from point A to point B on a full charge and can charge up where needed. Now, it's really good to know that the number of charging stations is expected to continue growing, and they're going to become even more prevalent. So that can really help to drive electric vehicle adoption and alleviate some of that range anxiety. So let's dive into common misconceptions. And this is a really good section because it helps to solidify some of the topics that we talked about during our course this evening. Now, the first common misconception that I want to address is that electric vehicles don't have enough range. This is often one that we hear from folks. Now, as we learned earlier, the average American drives about 40 miles per day, and that's according to the U.S. Department of Transportation. Even the shortest range electric vehicle can travel more than twice that distance before needing to be tethered to the power grid. Now, among affordable EVs is the Nissan Leaf, which can run about 150 miles on one charge, and the Hyundai Kona, which ups the ante to 258 miles on one charge. So EVs absolutely have enough range, and they're getting better with time as well. The second common misconception that we want to address is that electric vehicles are just as dirty as conventional internal combustion engine vehicles. Now, electric motors convert 75% of the chemical energy from the battery to power the wheels. Now, by comparison, gasoline vehicles only convert 20% of the energy stored in gasoline. So we know that electric vehicles are a lot more efficient. Now, what's more, electric vehicles emit no tailpipe emissions. Now, some argue that they still pollute the atmosphere, at least indirectly, via the power plants that produce electricity necessary to operate them. But as we learned, EVs tend to fare best in this regard when charged in parts of California, New York, the Pacific Northwest, where renewable energy sources are prevalent and make up a lot of the power grid. EVs tend to fare a little bit worse in areas like central US, in states like Colorado, Kansas, Missouri, because of their greater dependence on fossil fuels to produce electricity. So here in New York, electric vehicles are a lot cleaner than conventional vehicles. Now, the third common misconception is that electric vehicles do not last very long, or their batteries do not last very long, and will eventually end up in landfills. Now, we saw earlier, electric vehicles are federally mandated to carry a separate warranty for their battery packs for at least 8 years or 100,000 miles. Now, according to published reports, Nissan Leaf models that were used as taxi cabs actually retained 75% of their battery capacity after 120,000 miles on the road. And a Tesla owner is said to have 90% of their car's battery life intact after 200,000 miles. And once depleted, EV batteries, like 99% of the batteries on the market, can be recycled. So we can see that electric vehicles, of course, their batteries do in fact last quite a long time. There are a lot of warranties in place as well to make sure that they do last a long time. And if they do happen to need replacement, they can be recycled. Now, this is one of my favorites here. Driving an electric vehicle will not save the user any money in operating costs. Well, that is simply not true. Now, we learned earlier that fuel costs are much cheaper for electric vehicles than they are for gasoline vehicles, but let's consider those operational costs. This chart here shows the 10-year savings for an electric vehicle maintenance versus gasoline vehicle maintenance. Now, for the first line, for oil changes, we'll say that a gasoline would require about 10 changes over a 10-year period. I know for me, that probably would have been twice that, but we'll say once a year. That would result in about a $500 savings because electric vehicles, they don't have any oil. They don't require any oil changes. Now, the next is fluids. Gasoline vehicles would need about one change or so, whereas electric vehicles would not need any because they don't really have any fluids. This would result in a $120 savings. Now, the tire costs, they'd be about the same for electric vehicles or gasoline vehicles. Now, for mufflers, gasoline vehicle muffler maintenance would be around $350 or so, whereas electric vehicles, it would be $0 because they don't have a muffler. For brakes, a gasoline vehicle would need about one change, where electric vehicles would not need any because of that regenerative braking technology that really saves the wear and tear on the brake pads, resulting in about a $700 savings on average. Now, for the transmission, a gasoline vehicle could, potentially need servicing. That could be anywhere from about $1,000 to $2,000, if not more, for a replacement, whereas an electric vehicle would not need any. They don't have a transmission, so that would be $0. And then finally, for plugs and tuning, a gasoline vehicle would need up to about $1,000 in servicing, where again, an electric vehicle would not need any. Now, overall, just adding this up, EV owners could see about $5,000 in operational cost savings, which doesn't even account for the savings that you'd see from fuel costs. Now, the fifth and final common misconception that we want to address is that the power grid won't be able to handle the hundreds of thousands electric vehicles down the road. Now, according to a report published by Navigant Research, the nation could actually add thousands, if not millions, of electric cars to the current power system without really having to modify or make new plants. They would have to enhance the grid, especially in areas with high concentrations of electric vehicles like major cities, but we wouldn't have to build out any new power plants. Now, much of this has to do with the fact that electric vehicles tend to be charged at night during those off-peak hours where demand is at its lowest. Now, it's important to note that people were also really worried about the capacity of the electric grid when air conditioners and refrigerators first came out. Now, at the time, the electric grid really didn't have any problem handling this. In some areas with high concentration, you would see certain blackout hours or hours where they would say, please do not run your AC unit. But we've upped the grid since then and are continuing to do so to keep up with the electric vehicle demand. Alrighty, so we've gotten through all of the great content that we have for this evening for you. At this point, we'd like to wrap things up and just point you to some various learning resources that you can refer to. Now, the first one, of course, is the Drive Electric Long Island resource page. This page has a lot of great information about incentives, learning materials, and more. There's also the Alternative Fuels Data Center, which has a lot of information on generally electric vehicles and charging, as well as different incentives. And then finally, there is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA. They also have a really great web page as well that has information on incentives, vehicle forecasts, charging forecasts, and just a slew of great information. And I just want to say thank you to everybody for your time tonight, and thank you for coming. I'm going to leave it on this slide for just a moment. So if you'd like, you can jot down my email address. This is me right up here, Kaylee Verrill. Please feel free to shoot me an email anytime with questions. You can reach me, with questions about charging stations, the vehicles themselves. Don't hesitate to reach out. And I have Rosemary's information as well, so you can also contact her. Now, with our remaining time, we'll dive right into a Q&A with some of our electric vehicle drivers that we have with us this evening.
Just ask that my video gets started because I'm saying my video stopped by the host.
Oh, here, let's see. Maybe if I stop sharing, you'll be able to.
You might need, let me see. You might need to just, oh, there it goes. Okay. So I guess I'll start and just say that I am a proud owner of a Hyundai Kona, which I got in July, and I'm absolutely loving it. I've been promoting electric vehicles for a long time, but with the pandemic, my husband and I have not needed two cars. So that was my plan, to always get either a plug-in hybrid or a full electric as soon as we needed another one. And we've already, since July, driven over 2,000 miles because I live in Manhasset. We have a summer house in East Quogue. So going back and forth, and my daughter just bought a house in Patchogue, so we've been going back and forth to her house. And I've saved a ton in gas. Just to give you an idea, with the gas prices where they are, our other cars, a Mercedes C300 that uses premium gas, it was costing us about $20 round trip to go from Manhasset to East Quogue. And now it's like $8 in electric costs. So, but we love the acceleration. When you hit the accelerator, you don't say the gas pedal because there's no gas, but you hit the accelerator, it just goes. And the Hyundai is a subcompact for it to just go. I also applied for the Clean Pass, so I've been zooming in the HOV lane by myself when we're not together. And the regenerative braking is really cool too, because when you come off the accelerator, the car slows down, so you hardly ever need to go over to your brake, and then it charges the battery as it's decelerating instead of wasting that energy. So the Kona gets the equivalent of 108 miles per gallon on the highway and 132 miles per gallon city because of regenerative braking. So it's just all backwards, and it's just fun and great.
Yeah.
And then I was able to take advantage of the federal tax credit, the New York State credit. So interesting, the trim I got on the Kona was the SEL, which is a little bit a higher trim. It netted me to, the net cost with the incentives was $35,000, and I priced the equivalent ICE vehicle, because Kona comes in both models, and with a gas powered one, it would have been $32,000. So it was very comparable in price. I do have some information about the changes in the federal tax credit though, so if people are interested in that, I could quickly go through a couple of charts. But Beth, why don't you talk about your car first?
Sure. Yeah, just briefly. I drive a BMW i3 and I love it too. I actually bought it used. So mine was a 2017 that only had 20,000 miles on it. And I bought it a couple of years ago in 2020, and it runs perfectly fine. It was certified pre-owned. So I didn't get the federal rebate, but I did manage to get it, the whole car for half price. So for a $50,000 car, I got it for $25,000, which for me at that point, thankfully I had saved up. I knew it was time. So I was able to pull that off. And before that, I had the 2003 Prius, exactly the one that was in the picture, the little green one. I had driven for 17 years and I sold it to a friend. And he's kept it going. It's up to 280,000 miles on the original battery. So people are concerned about that. And, that didn't play out for me anyway with that Prius, which was a hybrid. And I did end up putting in a level 2 charger at my house, so that was a little extra expense at first, but it's definitely worth it. Although, on the times, like sometimes if I don't, need to use it, I use the regular 110 plug and just let it trickle in, and that's fine too.
Yeah, just on the charging front, I bought the car at the end of July, so I bought the juice box charger right away to try to get the $500 rebate, but it's still sitting in my living room because I've just been getting a couple of different electricians to give me some estimates. And in the meantime, we put over 2,000 miles on the car just using a 110 outlet. It's just amazing to think of how many hours your car is sitting in your driveway. So even when we took a ride out to East Quogue, we plug it in out there overnight, 12 hours, it gets about 5 miles of range per hour. So over, 8 hours, you got close to 40 miles. And then when I get back, same thing. So we are going to, eventually install the Type 2 charger. By doing that, you've got the flexibility of charging more quickly if you had long trips back to back. But for my average driving, I'm not in a rush to install it because I've been using it fine. As a matter of fact, we have a wedding this weekend up in Port Jervis. It's about a 90-mile trip. And we were concerned, well, do we want to stretch it just in case, what charges are up there? So I went on my Electrify America app, which is part of Hyundai. You got some free hours with Electrify America, and they're one of the charging networks. And I looked to see where there was chargers. Actually, no, I took on PlugShare, which has all the chargers. And it turns out that the hotel we're staying at has 4 chargers in for free at the hotel. So charging has not been an issue at all. But I did check out the Electrify America because I get 250 free kilowatt hours, and there's one in Carl Place, which is maybe 15 minutes away. But I haven't had the need to use it at this point. I think I only used a Type 2 charger once when we had an event down at Jones Beach Energy Center, and they had free charging there. So we plugged it in and got a couple hours of charging. Yeah.
I've only had to charge out, in public twice from when I drove upstate. Otherwise, I've been able to charge at night overnight at my house and never had to charge out anywhere. And a lot of people ask me, how much did my electric bill go up? I mean, for my house, which is a 2-person household, single family home, my bill is average around $60. I barely saw it go up at all because I work locally and, thankfully don't have to commute very far. So it hasn't been a huge impact on my electric bill. So $60, maybe $80 at the most I might pay for my whole house and my vehicle is pretty good. Saving a lot.
And PSCG Long Island came out with time of use rates targeted specifically to EV owners. So there's a couple of different plans that specify the hours that are the off peak, but it's a 40% discount so instead of like 21 to 24 cents a kilowatt hour, depending on if you're in the summer months or in the off months, it's down to like 13 cents a kilowatt hour. And so that's one of the advantages of having the Type 2 charger. You're not trickling all day long. You can plug it in and program it to just charge during the time of use rates where the rates are real low, and you get a really cheap rate from PSEG. There's King Cullen, and actually it's a Stop and Shop, not King Cullen, that has 2 Type 2 chargers, and I haven't been able. I was going to just charge it in just to see, new toy. Let's try it out. And they weren't working, and I reported it, and there had been previous reporting of it, and those are down. So it does happen. I can't. When I've looked on the this PlugShare app that tells you where there are charging stations, they'll tell you the status. So I've seen many that are up, but I haven't had the experience of having to need enough to tell you, from there. When we were at the Jones Beach Energy Center, they were all up and working. So, but I think that happens when it's not part of a my theory on the Stop and Shop is that they put it in there, somebody got it, some incentive, put it in for free, and nobody's watching it in terms of, of fixing it.
Okay. Another thing about charging people should know is that at this point in time, it's being worked on, but the charging companies don't accept just your direct credit card. So you join their network. So you join ChargePoint or EVgo, EV Connect, and you have an account that's tied to your credit card. So you just swipe the machine and it unlocks the connector to put into the car.
Or you can use your, some of them use your smartphone. You just tap your phone up to
Yeah.
the thing. So it's
It's pretty easy on your phone.
pretty easy.
Yep, you just tap it.
There are maybe half dozen of the popular networks. So you would see which ones are close by you that you're going to use and just join that. And a lot of them have, like I noticed that with Electrify America, which is the one I will be using when I need to. They charge about 43 cents a kilowatt hour if you're not a member. But if you are a member and you pay, like, I think it's $4 a month, then it's 31 or 32 cents a kilowatt hour. Some places charge not by the kilowatt hour, but by the number of minutes that you're on the thing, but it's all fairly comparable. The cheapest you will have to charge your car is, one, if you have solar, because you can use your excess capacity, and that's by far the cheapest. And people that have solar are just gloating because they haven't paid anything for their cars. But the second is being on a time of use plan with PSEG and charging at night, or third, just charging at home anytime during the day kind of thing, because it's the cheapest way to charge and the most convenient. I haven't been to a gas station. And just a quick thing on the incentive, because it's significant, $7,500 incentive tax credit. With the the Inflation Reduction Act that was just signed, as of August 15th, the old incentive is pretty much in place except for one major change, and that is that any vehicle that is eligible for the credit has to have been assembled in North America, which eliminates a lot of cars. Like my Kona, I didn't know it when I bought it, but it now is not eligible for the $7,500 credit, which I got, which was, significant. Come January 1st, there are other restrictions that are going to come into play. And the intention of the law or the act is to try to move not only final assembly of the vehicles, but the production of the batteries, which is a major part of the vehicle, and the obtaining of the critical minerals that are used in the battery in North America or with our trade partners. So there are a number of resources out there that you can put the VIN number of the car that you're looking to buy, and it'll come back and tell you if it's eligible or not. There's a lot of information out there, but the other restrictions that are coming into effect in January, besides these batteries having been some percentage of the batteries being assembled, being manufactured in the US or our trade partners, or the critical minerals coming from, some percentage of them coming from North America or recycled in North America, is there are income limits now starting in January that are up to 300,000 for joint filers, 225,000 for head of household, and 150,000 for single filers. So anyone with an AGI higher than that would not be eligible for it. There's also a cap on the value of the car itself. So the MSRP for vans, SUVs, and pickup trucks can be up to $80,000, and you'll still be eligible for the $7,500 tax credit if it's less than $80,000, or if it's all other vehicles, basically sedans, it's up to $55,000. So the intention there is to not take taxpayer money to fund it for people who really don't need it or can't afford it, or can afford it, and to kind of spread the incentives to the people that it's more of a hardship for. So that the credit is a total of $7,500, but that critical minerals and battery components requirement is each add up to $37.50 each. So the two together, if the car you're buying qualifies under the critical minerals criteria, that's $37.50. And if it also qualifies under the battery component, that's another $37.50. So it's a little confusing, more confusing than we would hope. It was much easier when we said $7,500, do it on your taxes. But I think in the long run, it will be better for our country. It'll help to keep jobs here in the US, different types of jobs, but jobs nonetheless in an important industry sector. Now, in the transition period, the other thing that is important is that there used to be the old limit, and Kaylee had mentioned that, up to 200,000. Actually, I think that was in our old chart, up to 200,000 vehicles per manufacturer. So Tesla, GM, and even Toyota later this year had reached the maximum, and there was no incentive available. Starting in January, those limits are lifted. So as long as those manufacturers meet the critical minerals requirement and the battery components requirement, then you could be eligible up to $7,500 again. Again, if you meet the income requirements and if you meet the MSRP requirements. So it's a little bit of, jump through hoops to figure out if you require it, but we'd be glad to help you if you have a particular car, or you can contact the manufacturer of the car, because they're the ones, and it's new data coming out every week on this. In the transition, if you, until January 1, if you have a car that is, it just has to be assembled in North America. So as I mentioned, the Hyundais are no longer eligible until they can show that they are either both assembled in North America and meeting the critical minerals component and the battery component. The other exciting thing is that they introduced a second credit. So that was the new EV tax credit. They now have a used EV tax credit as well. So vehicles to get this, it's up to $4,000 or 30% of the price of the vehicle, whichever's less. The vehicle has to be at least 2 years old. It has to cost $25,000 or less. It has to be sold by a dealer. And there are no other sourcing requirements. So all the things that we said about the new EV tax credit, minerals and battery components, all that stuff don't apply. There are income caps.
I missed out.
Yeah. There are income caps though, and they're less than the new EV. In this case, it's up to $150,000 for a joint return or a surviving spouse, $112,500 for a head of household, and $75,000 for others. So it's a lot to digest. We're still digesting it, but again, reach out to us if you have a question about a particular vehicle that you want to know if it might be eligible now or later. The other thing I just found out, which I'm happy I haven't installed my EV charger yet, is that they are kind of reinstated to the end of the year the property tax credit for installing EV chargers that cover the equipment and installation. That's up to $1,000, and they cover 30% of the cost. So that'll be another tax credit. After January 1, then it's going to still be in place, but in certain census tracts that are more disadvantaged communities, and they haven't come out with what those census tracts are yet. But so if you're thinking about installing a charging station, even if you want to prepare for a future car, now's a good time to do it, to get that the tax credit. It's a crazy time right now to buy a car. I got lucky because I went there to test drive the Ioniq 5. I didn't really care for it for what I was looking for, and there was a Kona there that someone had was planning to buy, and their credit fell through, so it was all prepped. So I bought it, and it was registered, insured, and financed in my driveway by 3 o'clock that afternoon. So
So we actually have, I'm putting this in the chat as well. We have an online course that you can take. It's basically more or less our slideshow that you can go through at your own pace, has all the same information in it. And I just put the link there and you get a certificate at the end that you're a certified expert on EVs afterwards.
Thank the East Hampton Library for hosting us. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much. This was very informative for everybody. And like I said earlier, it is being recorded. So if anybody wants to go back and review the information again, they can visit our webpage, YouTube webpage. It's East Hampton Library, and check out the video. Or like we have said earlier, you can visit the Drive Electric Long Island webpage for more information. And I think with that, we might end things for the evening. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you to Drive Electric Long Island. We really appreciated you joining us tonight.